Hello friends, and welcome to Volume 6 of Japan-only PS1 games, the 6th installment in the ongoing series dedicated to giving me a productive reason to play 25-year-old video games in my spare time. As usual, we're going to take an extended look at 3 games selected by the ever-reliable Wheel of Games. But today also marks the Japan-only debut of the Viewer Wheel, which consists entirely of games selected by you, the lovely viewer. This now bumps us up to 4 games per episode, so if you thought these videos were too long already, don't worry, I will always find new ways to disappoint you. If you want to find out how to submit your choice to the Viewer Wheel for future episodes, I'll have more information at the end of the video. For now though, I hope you're ready for another deep dive into the strange world of the Japanese PS1 library. The Wheel, as always, is full of great games, and you better believe it will provide.
The Wheel will provide.
First up, we have Guntu Western Front June 1944, making its way to Japanese shelves in March of 1998. This game was both published and developed by a studio named Electric Coin Japan, and as far as I can tell, this is the only game they ever made. What we have here is another light gun game, a genre that the Wheel certainly seems to have quite the bias for. Not that I'm complaining. In this game, you play as a member of the US military tasked with invading Nazi territory and destroying a variety of beefed up experimental Nazi super tanks. The opening cutscene is more or less the standard World War II fare, but with something a little unusual about it. So after experiencing what I can only describe as a World War II themed rock opera, it's time to get into the game. First things first, Guntu is a single player only light gun game that supports the Gun-Con and standard PlayStation controller, so no mouse support here I'm afraid. Thankfully, the good music and presentation doesn't stop when we enter the game, as we get introduced to our level select screen with another nice beat. Once we shoot the picture that enters the first level, we then get our mission briefing and target information, you know, in case you ever wanted to associate a Nazi anime character with the tank that you're going to blow up. There's some story text in these briefings that's in Japanese, but it is very brief and pretty much the only Japanese that you will see within the game. Up until this point, everything is going good, the presentation is cool, the music is great, I can't wait to see the game in action. And then it starts. Alright, Guntu. It's got some quirks. Namely that it is possibly one of the worst looking games on the PlayStation. This is the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a budget 3DO title, let alone the PS1 in 1998. Incredibly rough and blocky environments, the textures, trash, the backgrounds, trash, the vehicle models, trash, character models that lack almost any facial detail or animations whatsoever.
This is trash!
This is quite clearly, on the visual front, a complete and total mess in almost every conceivable way. There is no defending it, there is no excusing it, it's just really, really bad. That being said, in a way an argument could be made that this game looks so bad that it is in fact now good because of it. Guntu is a game I played through with a big dumb smile on my face because, I mean, look at it. This is charmingly bad. The way the soldiers run out and collapse, the terrible explosions, the environments you can barely make out. This is a bad game, but it's also a funny one because it's bad. The game almost immediately reminded me of an infamous Saturn release called Death Crimson, a light gun game that is so bad, it has events dedicated to how bad it is. In Japan, there's a name for games like this, kusoge games, kuso meaning shit, and ge meaning game. Now, I'm not sure if Guntu here is officially considered a Kusoge game by Japanese fans, but for me here, this definitely fits the bill. So look, the ridiculous visuals aside, there is a game here after all, so let's talk about that. Guntu, as we already mentioned, is a light gun rail shooter. It's more akin to classic shooters like Operation Wolf than the more modern light gun games available at the time. You move along very slowly and just shoot dozens and dozens of enemies. Sometimes you aren't moving at all and instead stand still and shoot dozens and dozens of enemies. Guntu is pretty much 6 levels of murdering an almost endless supply of Nazis. The body count might even give Wolfenstein a run for its money. You've got access to 2 different weapons, a handy machine gun useful for taking down soldiers and enemy projectiles, and also one of 3 different special weapons that you can choose before you start the game. An explosive rapid fire shot, a bazooka, or what seems to be some sort of weapon that makes lava erupt from below every enemy. Whatever weapons you do take though, ammo in this game is unlimited. You don't have to worry about reloading as your machine gun automatically refills once you stop firing, and your special weapon also regenerates over time. So in other words, use your machine gun for the fodder, switch to your special weapon for tanks, and while it recharges, swap back to the machine gun. Easy peasy. Interestingly, this game doesn't have a player health system. Instead, everything in this game revolves around the countdown clock at the top of the screen. Kill an enemy, you get time. Shoot a projectile, you get time. Wave your cursor all over the screen, you're gonna get some damn fine time. Of course, taking damage from enemy attacks drains your time. Soldiers might just chip away tiny bits of time with the bullets, but get hit by a tank or a bomb and you might see hundreds of seconds wiped out in, well, seconds. Really, the goal of the game is to kill as many fodder enemies as you can in the beginning to build up a solid bank of time, so that when you face the much more dangerous end level boss, you have enough time to get through, even if you make a few mistakes here and there. And you know what, the system kind of works. It's an interesting way of dealing with health in a light gun shooter, but really it feels kind of balanced and gives you enough enemies so that even if you get close to death, a string of quick kills might actually salvage your run. Honestly, the shooting here isn't even all that bad. I can't speak for those using a light gun, but the D-pad controls are about on par for the genre. One interesting quirk in this game is that you can press L1 or R1 to immediately move your cursor to the left or right of the screen. I kind of forgot it was a thing during most of the game, but it really did come in handy from time to time. The problem with Guntu isn't the gameplay, nor is it the visuals surprisingly. It's actually down to the level and game design itself. All the comically bad visual traits and competent gunplay can't save Guntu from its sheer repetition. The game's 6 levels aren't that long, but it can feel like you are playing them for an age. One of the game's levels is quite literally you moving forward very slowly, shooting the same couple of enemies for 5 whole minutes. Look how much time I have. Nobody needs that much time. Bosses in particular take a very long time to kill, and while they do mix up their patterns somewhat, every fight in this game just feels like a war of attrition. Fights start out fun, but after a few minutes that fun turns into boredom, and then the boredom just kinda lingers for another few minutes until the level eventually just ends. It also doesn't help that the environments are also very limited, with entire levels taking place across a handful of visually identical locations that unfortunately just don't make for interesting shooting galleries. It's disappointing because when you look at Guntu, you'd automatically assume that this game is going to be terrible, right? But parts of it are surprisingly competent. This could have been a fun game in spite of the visuals, but in the end, it's just a general lack of imagination that lets it down. You'd get a more varied experience playing Operation Wolf than this game, and for me, that's really quite the shame. It's even more disappointing when you consider the game's soundtrack never dropped the quality from the beginning, pumping out banger after banger each level. One saving grace is that the game does use Red Book audio, so even if you don't like the game, you can pop it in a CD player and enjoy the music at least. Which is probably what I'd actually recommend buying it for. Look, I still kinda had a fun time playing Guntu, if just for the pure comedy of it. Rarely do you see a game that is as upfrontly bad as this one, and I kinda love it because of it. It might be worth playing through once with some friends in the room for a laugh, but when you strip away all the dumb stuff, it really is just a very basic and repetitive World War II light gun shooter. And unfortunately, even with the prospect of guitar solos and blowing up anime Nazi boys, the game just isn't good enough to ever really be worth recommending, Kusoge or not.
The wheel will provide.
Next up, we have Choro Q2, released on the PlayStation in February 1997. The game was published by Takara and developed by a studio called Tamsoft, a name that might be familiar to all 5 of the Battle Arena Toshinden fans out there. So for those unaware, Choro Q is a series of toy cars released in Japan. Their gimmick was that they were very, very small, but also very cute. Think of them kind of like Japan's version of Micro Machines, and well, you get the general idea. So as you'd expect, Choro Q2 is a racing game, although the real appeal of the series is that it's not just a racing game, it's also an RPG. A car PG, if you will. It's a series I've known about for a while but haven't yet had the chance to try, although it is 100% right up my alley in terms of genre melding, so I'm excited to finally give the series a shot. So just to reiterate, we are playing Choro Q2, which is the second game in the series to appear on the PlayStation. Now, there are a lot of Choro games released on the platform, some even dedicated to things like boats or planes or even combat. And would you believe, all of these games are Japan exclusives. Except for one, the first game, which saw a release in PAL territories under the name Penny Racers. So we got that going for us, which is nice. Now, when it comes to Japan-only racing games, thankfully these are usually very import-friendly, but RPGs on the other hand, the opposite is true, and unfortunately when you combine the two together, things become a little bit more tricky. Unfortunately, I don't think this is a game you can just boot up and sort of wing it with, so to speak. There are tons of menus just littered with Japanese text, and almost all of these are quite important to succeeding in the game. Thankfully, there are guides and plenty of long plays to help you along, but simply just sitting down and going in blind, you'll probably have a bad time. But fear not, because Choro Q2 is one of the games blessed with a fan translation, and a pretty damn good one at that. So as a heads up, the rest of the gameplay you'll see today will be from this version, the one that I can actually play. So Choro Q2 has a few basic modes that you'd expect from a racing game, free play, split screen multiplayer, etc. But really the main selling point of this game is the Grand Prix mode. In this mode, you're more or less gifted a crappy car to start your career, and immediately you can enter into different races to try earn some cash. But of course, you'll learn pretty early on that even with good racing skills, a crap car can only get you so far. We can't win the race, but at least we're able to pick up some money in the process. Now I know what you're thinking, this is the part where we'd spend that money to upgrade our vehicle, and you are correct, that is exactly what we should be doing. But in Choro Q, you don't just simply head to a menu to upgrade your car. Nope, you have to take a little visit into town and find the upgrade shop yourself. Or the body shop. Or the paint shop. Or the casino. You know, whatever you're in the mood for. So yeah, Choro Q is a game that also has an open world town to explore full of different shops, minigames and hidden secrets. Once you discover a shop in the town, you can then access it again quickly from the game's menus, but actually reaching some of the mid and late game shops in the town require more than just simply finding them. You might need to improve your speed or handling to reach them, you might have to risk a few dodgy jumps, or even just have on a special set of wheels that lets you get over big bumps. The town exploration is really what gives the Choro Q series its edge, and while this feature would be significantly expanded upon in later entries, even here in its rudimentary form, it is such a charming and fun addition to a racing game. Of course, the key word here is racing game, and regardless of the time you'll spend exploring the town or customizing your vehicle, the majority of your game time in Choro Q will be spent racing. Now, interestingly on the gameplay front, I'd say Choro Q2 actually plays more like a traditional racer than you think, especially given its focus on cute toy cars. Choro Q places a big emphasis on road grip and turning, and if you're not kitted out properly for the terrain that you're driving on or taking turns too sharply at speed, well, you'll find one little mistake can cost you a whole race in this game. Thankfully, the game's early tracks are quite easy, and the fact that you're also in an unfortunately slow car makes picking up the game a breeze. The secret to driving in this game is one thing and one thing only: letting go of the accelerator while turning. Touch the accelerator while you turn, you might spin out. Let go of the accelerator, you can take almost any turn with ease. What about braking, you might ask? Well, yes, there are times where you'll need to brake for very sharp turns, but really the vast majority of turns in this game, just balance between accelerating and turning, and you'll do great. If you can learn this early on in your low-level Trashmobile, by the time you get upgrades to things like speed, acceleration, turning, braking, etc., you'll be able to navigate even some of the most complicated courses like a pro. And when it comes to upgrading, things become a little more complicated as time goes on too. There will of course always be straight upgrades with stuff like engines and transmission that can only get better as they go up. But for items like tyres and steering, different options sometimes suit different tracks. If you've got an off-road track with tight turns, maybe go for the off-road wheels and super turning. If you've got a snowy track with longer, wider turns, maybe tighten up your steering and take that studless tyre for better grip. And if it's just concrete, well, racing tyres will give you the best possible grip and speed available. There's always an ideal setup for the different tracks, and while you will be able to overcome a lot of the races even without choosing the optimal setting, it plays to invest and cover yourself for every available scenario. Really, the racing here is pretty fun. It's easy to pick up and offers some decent challenges later on into the game. Now, I wouldn't say it is the tightest driving you'll ever see in a game, but it's good enough for what the game aims to be. The tracks themselves are pretty decent too. There's around 15 in total, running the gamut from traditional racetracks to seasonal off-road, and even some underwater and cyber locations, because why not? Even with the large number of tracks and visual variety, I wouldn't say they are the most exciting tracks in the world, at least if you're expecting any sort of wild section or gimmicks. But if you like traditional racing, I'm sure you'll find these pretty enjoyable. Unfortunately though, I can't say the same about the visuals, which on the whole aren't looking all that hot. The game itself is built using the same engine as Battle Arena Toshinden, which I mean, isn't exactly known for its looks. Now while it is cool that they repurposed the engine and made it work for a 3D racer, it's definitely one of the ugliest ones I've played in some time. Yes, the tiny smushed up cars look cute and they all have this nice cartoony styling to them, but the overall detail, it just isn't the best. And that is doubly true for the tracks, which can look very rough. You can expect a lot of odd visual bugs and quirks. The engine oftentimes seems like it's struggling with what's happening on screen, and of course, that means the frame rate is also pretty inconsistent too, jumping anywhere from 60 frames per second to 10 frames per second all in the one race. Although more often than not, the game straddles the line somewhere between 30 frames and 20 frames per second. If you play your racing games for the visuals, the realism, well, this is not the game for you. And also, you probably shouldn't be playing PS1 racing games in general. And look, while the visuals are certainly a negative, at least the game has one of the catchiest and most upbeat soundtracks I have heard in a very long time. The music in the town, the music on the tracks, hell, even the music in the menus. It's this incredibly sunny blend of Japan fusion and various other genres. It is just the most feel-good shit. I'd even go as far as to say it is one of the best original soundtracks I've ever heard in a racing game. It is truly some top-tier stuff. Look, Choro Q2 is far from being the best looking racer on the console, but really that was never the series' selling point. The appeal and joy of this game is exploring a town in your little car, finding loads of shops and secrets, choosing from a gigantic variety of different customization options, and just winning races in your cool souped up toy car. And as far as gameplay loops go, with this one I was hooked from start to finish, bad visuals or not. This game ticked all the right boxes for me as a fan of racing games and RPGs, and while it doesn't particularly excel at either genre, it does more than enough to create an addictive hybrid of the two that's still a lot of fun to play even today. I can't say for certain if it's the best game in the series, but it's absolutely good enough to make me very interested in trying some of the others, and going by how many are on the PS1 alone, well, I'm sure it won't be too long until we come across another. For now though, if you're looking at trying your first car PG, well, you certainly can't go wrong with Choro Q2, a very fun and very cute game that any racing fan should get a kick out of.
The wheel will provide.
Game number 3 is Bomberman Land, making its way to the PlayStation in December of the year 2000. This game was both published and developed by Hudson Soft, which, being a Bomberman game, isn't very surprising. Bomberman is a series I have a lot of love for, whether it's the traditional Bomberman style of gameplay either solo or with friends, or the excellent 3D Bomberman games for the N64. The character was a pretty big part of my childhood growing up, and I generally try to always have at least one Bomberman game for whatever consoles I own. And I suppose while the series is kinda languishing in Konami hell at the moment, it's also easy to forget that there is an incredible amount of Bomberman games and spin-offs. Racing games, sports games, RPGs, there's pretty much a Bomberman game out there for everyone. Enter Bomberman Land, a spin-off series that is half minigame collection, half story-based RPG. There are quite a lot of these games, by the way. A good chunk did get released over in the West, but the original trilogy are still Japan-only exclusives, and lucky us, we're going to take a look at the very first entry in the series today. So, first things first, this game has a lot of Japanese text. So I'm going to tell you up front, I have no idea what's going on in this game. From what I gather, Bomberman and his bomber pals are taking a visit to a theme park called Bomberman Land, and as far as the story goes, that's about all I've been able to pick up. But we did arrive on a pirate ship, so that's pretty cool. So there is a story, but with no story guides or translation available, it is all a mystery to me. And unfortunately that means there's already a big portion of the experience that is inaccessible to non-Japanese readers. And I also kinda got the fear that that would be pretty much it in terms of being able to progress in this game at all. But in spite of the language barrier, Bomberman Land is still surprisingly playable even for a dum-dum like me. It's also probably because it's kind of a kid's game, but yeah, I'll show you what I mean. So the goal in Bomberman Land is quite simple. The theme park is split up into 5 different zones, each assigned with their own unique colour. Each zone has 25 stamps that you need to collect, and you can collect these stamps in one of 2 different ways. One is to beat the high score for any of the various minigames housed within the zones, and the other is to explore the zones and solve different puzzles and challenges around the map. Getting enough tickets in one zone will allow you to pass through different gates that will then give you access to new zones where you'll pretty much do it all over again. The minigames come in various shapes and sizes, from logic puzzles to shooting gallery style games, and even some homages to various different arcade titles like Frogger and Pang. God, I love Pang. As expected, the minigames here don't really offer anything groundbreaking in terms of gameplay, but one thing I must give Bomberman Land credit for is the presentation of the games and just the sheer variety of them on offer. The games look very nice, they play really well, and generally there's very little repetition from game to game. I mean, you will see the odd game repeated from time to time, but for the most part, Hudson Soft has crammed a lot of minigames into this package, and as you move through the story, it's always fun to see what sort of Bomberman themed game you'll come across next. Maybe it's styling the Bomberman phone. Who knows? Finding minigames in the open world is also quite easy. You can sometimes find minigames by chatting to certain NPCs out in the towns, but most of the buildings in the game also house different minigames, and getting started is as simple as walking in and briefly chatting to the NPC inside. Of course, all the instructions are in Japanese, which could be a problem, but thankfully I didn't come across a single game in my playtime where it wasn't immediately obvious what you needed to do. Simplicity is the key here in Bomberman Land, and the minigames themselves take good advantage of that. Of course, you can't have a Bomberman game without some traditional Bomberman gameplay, and thankfully some of the minigames let you test out your skills in some shorter Bomberman levels. These play pretty much like any classic Bomberman title and are essentially time trials that see you trying to make it through various floors, scoring as many points as you can and leaving before the clock runs out. Nothing really too exciting here for people used to classic Bomberman gameplay, but the inclusion is a welcome one. Now, minigames are fun, but they still only make up a small part of the overall tasks within a zone. The majority of your playtime will actually be spent exploring the different zones and hunting down the remaining stamps, and this is where things get a bit more tricky. Oftentimes getting a stamp could require something as simple as interacting with a specific object or even just talking to an NPC. Other times, it might take a bit more exploration, like finding hidden entrances dotted around the map, or even just running everywhere to see if you happen to trip over a stamp that's just buried in the ground. The good news is that most of the time, simply just exploring your environment and interacting with every NPC and object you see will net you the vast majority of stamps in an area, but there are also plenty of times you will come across a few obtuse ones as well. This is where the language barrier comes into play, because while I'm sure there are plenty of NPCs who are giving you nice straightforward hints on what to do, but without being able to understand any of them, how would you know that you're meant to charge into this specific vending machine at high speed? Or to reunite these 2 friends across the 2 different zones? or talk to the fishermen in a specific order to be gifted a fishing rod so you can then fish for stamps. Look, with enough trial and error, you could probably get lucky with most of this, but considering the sheer number of stamps to collect in this game, getting through this one without a guide will be quite a challenge. And unfortunately, from what I can tell, there are no written guides for this game, but thankfully there are long plays and even a video documenting each of the non-minigame stamps, so if you want to go to the effort of beating this game, well, there's at least a little help out there if you need it. I suppose then the question remains, is Bomberman Land fun in spite of that issue? Are the minigames and exploration worth playing the game for alone? And the answer to that is, yeah, kinda. While the gameplay on offer here isn't exactly anything special, I think the presentation of the whole thing is just so incredibly charming. Bomberman Land is a very nice looking game, and while it is far from the most impressive 2D game you'll see on the console, its colourful environments and variety of different characters all help give the game this really pleasant vibe. The game was kind of relaxing to me in a way, like you almost get this stress-free holiday vibe while playing it. It's a nice day in the theme park, just run around and play fun little minigames with happy characters and nice background music. Speaking of the music, it's also pretty damn good too. Once again, we have another very catchy and upbeat soundtrack, which isn't surprising given the theme of the game, although if you're expecting a banging Fuchikoma techno Bomberman soundtrack like many of the era's other Bomberman games, then you might be a little disappointed. It is certainly far from the best Bomberman soundtrack out there, but for a game like this, the soundtrack on offer perfectly complements the overall vibe and makes for a pleasant listening experience throughout. So that's Bomberman Land, and look, as far as minigame collections and cute little adventure games go, you could certainly do a lot worse than this one. Being a Bomberman fan myself, I got a kick out of exploring the world and its characters, even if I didn't exactly know what was going on. But would I say this is something really worth trying out for non-Bomberman fans? Probably not. While it is a good game, there is a certain level of hand-holding you'll need throughout parts of the game to overcome the more obtuse challenges. And while that is certainly doable, the effort of watching and tracking things through a video guide certainly does break up the flow and puts a bit of a dampener on things. Plus, given the sheer amount of dialogue and story you'll just have to skip through and miss out on, you gotta ask yourself, is it worth going through all that for what is essentially just a glorified minigame collection? And I think the only people who would really find that worthwhile are Bomberman fans. But if that's you, well then there is a very pleasant, enjoyable and cute Bomberman spin-off for you to try. Plus it's also got Pang, so you know, get right on it.
You will provide.
Our final game and first ever Japan-only viewer selection is Suzuki Bakuhatsu. This game was added to the wheel by Fuzzy Fura. Thanks a mil for your contribution and congrats on being the wheels chosen. Suzuki Bakuhatsu, which translates simply as Suzuki Explosion, launched to Japanese audiences in July of the year 2000, courtesy of publisher Enix and developer Sol. So what is Suzuki Bakuhatsu? Well, I guess the easy answer is that it's a puzzle game. But the thing is, it's also kind of an experimental art piece about a young Japanese woman who has the misfortune of discovering bombs hidden within seemingly ordinary objects. But luckily, she also happens to be a master at defusing bombs, and so it's up to her to defuse them through a series of high quality 3D puzzles. And believe me, it is even weirder than it sounds. You could be getting up in the morning, accepting a delivery, and then disarming an orange before you know it. The core of Suzuki Bakuhatsu is split between these two parts: the live scenes where you follow the adventures of the lovely Miss Suzuki and her penchant for discovering bombs, and the puzzle sections that follow where you disarm the bomb piece by piece using a variety of different gadgets. It's probably easier to look at these parts of the game separately, since both are in many ways very at odds with one another stylistically, which is putting it lightly. We'll look at the live scenes featuring Suzuki first, since she is the face of the game after all, so we might as well get to know her. The majority of these play out almost like a visual novel, where you will cycle through a series of still images one by one as a scene plays out, oftentimes with little visual effects, odd camera cuts and voice dialogue sprinkled in throughout. There's a part of my mind that certainly thinks the choice to go for the plumbers don't wear ties route of visual storytelling is well, it's a choice. But the difference here is that Suzuki Bakuhatsu does these scenes with a level of confidence and bravado that really just sells the whole thing. It's not exactly the most elegant setup you'll ever see, but throughout the various range of scenarios that you'll follow our protagonist through, there's always this clear focus on the character, her range of expressions, and the sort of just charming bemusement that she exudes in the face of almost constant peril. It's hard not to just naturally warm to Suzuki throughout the experience, even if you're simply just flipping through a series of still images, waiting to see what happens next. And while these still image parts do make up the majority of the live action content in the game, there is also a decent number of full motion video scenes too, and if this game cracks out some FMV, you better believe you are in for a treat. Is there a story here behind all of this? To be honest, I'm not so sure. It really does seem like a series of different surreal scenarios featuring our main character. There is the odd bit of Japanese dialogue or text that flashes up on the screen, which of course means I am missing out on the context of certain things from time to time. But even after looking at the opinions of those who can read Japanese, the answer is always kind of, it is what it is. The benefit of this though is that it makes the game surprisingly import friendly, as the majority of the game's scenes place a focus on storytelling through visuals and sound rather than dialogue to convey the scene, and even though you will miss out on the context surrounding certain sections, you can still very much enjoy what's happening on the screen in spite of it. But of course, as we know, these segments, as charming and strange as they are, only make up a part of the experience, and beneath all of this lies a puzzle game. And not just any puzzle game. What we have here is legitimately one of the most stylish, satisfying, and forward-thinking puzzle games on the console. You know those games you'd often see on mobile devices, games like The Room that place an emphasis on rotating objects in a full 3D space to find hidden sections and solve various puzzles? Well, Suzuki Bakuhatsu's gameplay is very similar to those games, and while the gameplay here is a lot more simplistic than some of the more modern versions we'd see today, they still pretty much managed to nail it. I'll use the game's first puzzle as an example, since it more or less teaches you everything you need to know. The goal is always to defuse a bomb hidden within an object, and of course to get to the bomb you'll need to carefully dismantle the object piece by piece until you eventually reach your destination. Of course, being a game about bomb defusal, there's also a timer ticking down in the background, so you don't want to dilly-dally about too much. When you gain control, you can move around the object using the D-pad, which moves you step by step to a series of set points. You don't have free control over the camera, but the set points allow you to get a good view of your object without ever running the risk of going off course. If you find a part you can interact with, it will be highlighted, and from there you can choose one of your tools to interact with it. In this case it's a screw, so you remove it with your screwdriver and move further into the object, where we are then able to remove some more screws and eventually get access to the timer, where we clip the wires and get treated to possibly the greatest ranking screen of all time. Of course, that's just the first puzzle in the game, and it's not too long before you come across increasingly complex and elaborate puzzles, and if you thought disarming an orange was strange, it's not much longer until you're defusing a bomb hidden within a handgun, or a telephone, maybe even a cassette tape. And sure, look, if that's too small for you, why not go ahead and defuse the moon? The gameplay remains mostly the same throughout, but each puzzle offers up new gimmicks and tools as the game progresses, and really some of the puzzle design here is just beyond clever in its implementation. This can be a challenging game. It's about bomb defusal after all. You've got a timer constantly ticking down, various traps and failsafes that you can trigger, and plenty other ways that you can guarantee you'll blow yourself up. But in spite of that, I also can't remember the last time I played a puzzle game where pretty much everything you do just looks and feels so satisfying. It's a game that is somehow simultaneously relaxing and stressful, but above all else, it's just really, really fun. Although I will say, even though the game is easily playable with no knowledge of Japanese, there are plenty of notes you can read during the puzzles that offer hints and advice. Thankfully, the vast majority of these you can live without, but there are some notes that are required when it comes to cutting the wires at the end of a puzzle. Early on, it tells you which wire to cut using a little danger tag, but as the game goes on, it expects you to pick up the knowledge from notes and other hints that are littered on the object. And if you can't read Japanese, well, you're out of luck. Worst case scenario, it's a 50-50 chance that you blow yourself up at the very end. And while you can restart from the beginning of a bomb, some of the later bombs can take upwards of 10 minutes to defuse, so blowing yourself up after a marathon like that, well, it's not the best feeling. The good news though is that there are plenty of guides for this game online, so if you want to avoid the coin flip of death when cutting a wire, well, the option is there. Before I finish talking about the puzzles, I also have to take the time to highlight the graphical quality of this game. Even for a 2000 release, these are some of the most detailed 3D models I have seen on the console. There's just a level of polish and care that's put into this game that really puts it a step above its contemporaries. You can say what you want about the live action scenes, but no game on the PlayStation has a better looking handgun than this one. Sound is a bit of an interesting topic in this game too. The music in this game was composed by Japanese DJ Fantastic Plastic Machine, and while there is plenty here to sample, background music wise the game is oddly silent a lot of the time. During the puzzles you'll often just hear the ever present ticking of a bomb and the various satisfying sound effects that come with dismantling it. I do like the choice to keep the audio centered on the bomb itself, as it does help to keep you focused, but I could see some people not liking the constant ticking and alarms, as when the game gets loud, it can get pretty damn loud. The live action scenes also oftentimes don't have any background music, instead opting for various different sound effects and pieces of spoken dialogue throughout. Fear not though, as when the game does decide to add music into the mix, similarly to the FMV scenes, it does not disappoint. In my opinion, the most memorable live action scenes are usually accompanied by some great music, and whether it's during a makeshift mecha anime opening, or just you singing up on the big stage, whenever the music does make an appearance in this game, you are in for a treat. When it comes to playtime, a run through of this game from start to finish will usually take you anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how good you are at defusing bombs. And look, that may not seem like a long time, but we haven't even talked about the branching path system. After a certain point in the game, you get the choice of choosing between various different paths to take, and on my second playthrough, the amount of different puzzles and cutscenes I came across almost made it feel like a brand new game. I believe you need around 3 playthroughs to experience them all, but between this and the various difficulty options, there's a lot to keep you coming back if you crave some more bomb defusing fun. Look, when it comes down to it, Suzuki Bakuhatsu is an experience to say the least. It's strange, it's surreal, but above all else, it's special. Part art house visual novel and part bomb defusal video game, it's one of the most aesthetically striking games on the console, and yet also one of its most enjoyable puzzlers. It's a game that you almost feel shouldn't exist, yet here it is. If you're looking for a quintessential example of what makes the Japanese PS1 library so special, well, ladies and gentlemen, it's games like this. Something you probably never even knew existed, but once you try it, it's likely something you'll never forget. Plus, you can blow up the ocean. Can't think of many games that let you do that. And with that, it's time to bring a close to Volume 6. We got to check out the most realistic World War II experience on the console, a cute car PG where you'll spend half of the game failing to make this jump, one of the 8 video games where Bomberman visits a theme park based on himself, and a game that features a seemingly never-ending spree of cutscenes where you explode. But before we finish up, we need to slot each game into one of 5 categories. Is the game a must-play? Is it something worth trying if you like the look of it? Is the game just kinda meh? Is the game trash and not worth your time? Or did I hit a brick wall and found the game unplayable due to the language barrier? Today's entries see Guntu Western Front making it into Meh tier, Choro Q2 and Bomberman Land making it into Try tier, and finally Suzuki Bakuhatsu exploding its way into Must Play tier. Really, when it comes to Guntu, this is a game that straddles the line between the meh tier and the trash tier, although even with its terrible visuals and super repetitive level design, the shooting gameplay itself is surprisingly solid, the music is fantastic, and it's also just kinda really funny looking. Might be worth a look for one playthrough at least, but just don't expect to come back to it after that. The Choro Q series as a concept is perfect for me. Race your cute little car, earn money, explore a town, and buy lots of upgrades. It is far from the best pure racing game on the console, and the RPG elements are also a little basic compared to some of the later entries in the series, and the visuals definitely leave a little something to be desired. But if the concept itself sounds appealing to you, you will find a lot to love with this game, and it's definitely something worth checking out for people looking for something a little bit different with their racing games. Bomberman Land is a charming spin-off that doesn't really offer too much to anybody but Bomberman fans. It is essentially a glorified adventure game crossed with a minigame collection, but there's no denying the overall presentation and easygoing gameplay is very appealing nonetheless. A game that Bomberman fans will absolutely get a kick out of, but for everybody else, you could probably skip out on this one. And finally, Suzuki Bakuhatsu, absolutely one of the most surreal and memorable games I've ever played, and also one of the most addictive and satisfying puzzlers on the PlayStation. Clearly the live action part starring Suzuki won't be for everybody, but I admire the confidence and bravado that it takes to create something as out there and unique as this. But one thing I'm sure everybody will enjoy is the excellent bomb defusal puzzles, and this aspect of the game is good enough on its own to make this a must play in my opinion. Everything else is just an added bonus really. Before we finish up, I'd like to give a special thanks to Fuzzy Furra Furra for today's viewer selection. If you'd like to submit your choice for a game to appear in future volumes of this series, you can find out how by watching the channel update video available over on my channel. There's a handy link in the description below if you want to check that out. Also, if you've already submitted a game to the viewer wheel, don't worry, that will remain in the wheel until further notice, so you don't have to worry about submitting anything else for the time being. As always, I'd like to say a big thank you for joining me here today. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Any support is always greatly appreciated. I'll be back soon with Volume 7 of obscure and forgotten PS1 games, so I hope you will all stick around for that. Until then, take care of yourselves and don't forget to praise the wheel.
Yeah! Check it out, Joe! それでは今週のトップ3の前にコマーシャル Here we go!